to me, this has the potential to be a home run hit for Kansas if they were able to eventually close the deal potentially.
Yeah, I would call it a home run hit if Kansas does get him.
Pay heed, all who enter, beware the podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. Member FDIC. Today we're going to be talking some more Kansas basketball because there is some potential movement on the horizon for KU as they look to fill out the rest of their roster. A position that we've been talking about quite a bit on the show that Kansas still needs to fill. Well, they are interested in a possible target that we will dive into a little bit deeper about how that could look potentially if Kansas is able to close the deal. Plus, maybe what else they still might need to look at and maybe fall back in case things go in different directions. So, as you know, with the portal, things are always fluid. Things are always happening, not happening. There's smoke. There's all kinds of stuff. Lots of happenings in the portal. So we'll try to fill you in, get you caught up on everything that's going on right now for Kansas, as they look to add to their already transfer portal class that they already have of 3 players. As always, if you have not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your audio, and on the YouTube channel. We're over 800 subscribers on YouTube. Let's get to 900. So if you haven't subscribed on the YouTube channel at Kansas Jock KCSN, please do so. And if you are listening or watching on Wednesday evening, you'll also want to check out our YouTube channel for a live show with Kevin. He's going to be with Ryan Wallace talking to Ian Premer, who is the number 1 prospect in the state of Kansas for the class of 2026 in the tight end position. He's also a top 50 prospect and 24/7, number 3 tight end in the country, I believe. So we're talking about a real high-level prospect. He's going to be unveiling his top 5 remaining schools as he starts to look into making some summer visits. We'll be talking with Kevin and Ryan about that. That's going to be live on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN. And you can also find it on the K-State YouTube channel as well. As part of KCSN also. So a little bit of a dual stream there as he's going to be naming his top 5. And we don't want to reveal his top 5, but we're going to be on the KU channel so that maybe we can give you a hint about one potential school that might be on his list of top 5. So if you're listening, ever watching or listening on Wednesday evening, you can check that out, 8:30 on Wednesday. And if you are watching or listening after the fact, you can just go find it after the fact as well on the YouTube channel and also on our audio platform. So very exciting things happening on that front. All right, let's dive into the transfer portal here with KU basketball as we start to peel back the layers a little bit of what's been transpiring over the past couple of days with KU. It's a major movement. Obviously, a position that you and I have talked about quite a bit, Kevin, is the 3 position. You look at this roster right now for Kansas. Obviously, it's incomplete, but you know you've got 2 stars in Darren Peterson and Floyd Badunga. You feel like Melvin Council, Jaden Dawson, / Marco Jackson is one of those 3 guys that's probably going to be your starter at the 2 position next to Darren Peterson. You feel pretty good about Trey White probably as slotting into a starting role as well. At least one spot, and that's at the wing position. And this was a position that, if you recall, when I talked about it a couple weeks ago, I said this may be the most important position remaining for Kansas and that they want to find a big fish, so to speak. But because of that, it may be a little bit more of a slower burn because you see some players of that caliber maybe either are waiting in the NBA, possibly looking into the NBA draft, or heading into the portal. Yet the portal, of course, is now closed. So all the players that could enter are in. So that's what you're looking at. And so a couple of guys that we've been talking about, you think like an RJ Lewis, there was a Jabari Watkins out of Florida State, but a new name that we have mentioned as well that was in the portal that Kansas has seemingly turned the heat up on a little bit. That is one Darian Williams out of Texas Tech, and he's a player that Kansas fans should be familiar with because of the fact that he played against Kansas this season and scored 14 points.
Absolutely. Kansas 2 years ago.
Yes. Yeah, he's been at Texas Tech for the past 2 years, started his career at Nevada, average over 15 points per game. This is an interesting one in that I think from the Texas Tech standpoint, they probably would have liked to keep Darian Williams. The problem is they also had the Big 12 Player of the Year in JT Toppin, who demanded a large sum of money. And because of that, feels like Texas Tech, maybe for one reason or another, didn't want to meet what Darian Williams may have been asking for. he goes into the transfer portal. Darian Williams himself also is a player that is interested in the NBA draft and is somebody that even has expressed that he wants to explore that option as well. So there's multiple factors here, but let's just start here, Kevin. From strictly a fit standpoint, setting aside maybe some of the outside factors, from strictly a fit standpoint, how would Darian Williams fit? Does he check the boxes that you're looking for what KU might be needing at that position?
Yeah, I think so. I think he fits in that he's a guy that can play both the 3 and the 4 and did that at Texas Tech. And so if you found somebody that you wanted to go with at the 3 and you felt like, hey, this is a guy we like more than Trey White at the 4, you could play Darian Williams at the 4. At the same time, you can play those two guys together and they would complement each other pretty well. Darian Williams is a guy I think that has a lot of intrigue for a lot of different reasons. One of them, he ended the year on an absolute tear. He averaged 21 points a game in the NCAA tournament. He scored 30 against KU on, I think, perfect 12 of 12 shooting a year before that. Didn't miss a shot, had like 11 rebounds too. He's a really good player, Nick, and he's a guy that has toughness. He can rebound. He's not an otherworldly athlete is sort of the thing. Obviously, the athleticism plays up a little bit if he's at the 4 rather than at the 3. But you're looking for a second sort of ball in hand scorer, somebody that can play alongside Darren Peterson and relieve him of some scoring burden, and somebody who in the half court can put the ball in their hands and go get a bucket. And you see some of that with Dawson. I think obviously he's got some of that. Council is a slasher and attacker type of guy, but Williams has sort of that complete scoring package where he can come off the screens, he can catch and shoot, he can also handle the ball and take guys off the bounce and do a lot of things that way. And so when you're looking at it and saying, okay, what do you need? You've got, sort of one tent pole over here in Darren Peterson and what he's going to bring to you offensively. Obviously, they're expecting things from him defensively too, but really he's kind of the guy offensively that's going to stir the drink. At the other end, you've got Flaherty, who's going to sort of be that same thing, I think, defensively. And it's not that Flaherty's not going to score. I think with his energy level and with the team that Kansas is building around Flaherty, he's going to be a tough matchup because when you have guys coming off of that screen and you're looking at, okay, we can't help because Jaden Dawson's over in the corner and, Trey White is a really good cutter. And so you have to watch that. Flaherty's going to get more opportunities because of the roster they're building too. And so you really like to have sort of that 3-4 combo guy. And Kansas has kind of kicked the tires on a few of those guys, right? I mean, Coward is a name that's come up a little bit. I think he's more 3 than 4. We've talked about Tyron Stokes out of high school. If he were to reclassify, he's a guy that may be a little more 4 than 3. Williams is a guy that can do both, can plug into both with different kinds of lineups, and can be that number 2 scorer behind Peterson and do it really, really well. And we know, Nick, that he can do it at the Big 12 level because he's already done it at Texas Tech.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing is he's a bona fide proving Power 5, Power 4 scorer, right? Because he did it at Texas Tech, as you said. And this basically is exactly what Kansas needs in my book. I mean, this is what I've been hoping Kansas would add. And as you said, there's different irons in the fire. It feels like Darian Williams is the one that maybe has the most traction right now. But yeah, you mentioned Tyron Stokes, you mentioned Cedric Coward, along with a couple of the guys mentioned earlier. And so with Williams specifically, though, I think this is a guy that makes a lot of sense in this position because of some of the things you outlined. And on top of that, maybe the biggest thing that you mentioned, Kevin, is he can handle the ball. He can work with the ball in his hands. Part of when we talked about with Trey White committing, if you want to go back and listen to what we had to say about at the time of that commitment, is Trey White's not a guy that handles the ball very much. He was not a guy that had a very high assist rate. He's not somebody that's going to be a real threat as a passer so much at that position. Obviously, you have Darren Peterson. Council and Dawson can handle the ball, but maybe not so much as passers. And I think I look at Darian Williams as a guy that absolutely could be that threat, right? That type of guy that could not only be a real serious scoring threat, but also a passing threat as well on the offensive end. And I think you outlined it perfectly, Kevin. Darren Peterson's going to be more than likely your leading scorer. I would think at this point. You expect Floyd Badunga to be productive offensively, but I don't think a world where Floyd Badunga is your second leading scorer is a overly positive world for KU. I think you want another player that can be that high level scorer. And a guy like Jaden Dawson could be it on a, maybe here or there, right? Like not every night out. Like I'm talking like a night in, night out, your bona fide second score. Yeah. I don't know that a guy like Dawson or Council is necessarily going to be that on a night in, night out basis. Someone like Williams, to me, screams, okay, yes, here is your secondary every game score that is going to really, really, as you said, alleviate some of the burden of Darren Peterson, right? I mean, I think you and I both expect Darren Peterson to be an absolute superstar. I think many other people around basketball think that as well, considering he's the projected number one pick in the 2026 draft. That all being said, you don't want to put too much pressure on him to be the only guy, right? The only scorer. You want to make sure that you have players around him that can complement him and also be scorers. And I think that's where Darian Williams to me really jumps out. You look at a guy like a Cedric Coward, as you said, who did it at the lower level and then briefly did it against at Washington State for the very small sample as he had. I think 7 games before he suffered an injury. So you got the injury aspect of it. You look at RJ Lewis, who did it in the Big East. Obviously, that's a high level, but even still, to do it in the Big 12, to me, says the loudest out of any of those guys. And so that's what stands out with Darian Williams. And I think you add in the fact that he is a competent three-point shooter. We may talk on three-point shooting later on in the show a little bit more in depth, but he's a competent three-point shooter. He shot over actually 40% over, I believe, in Nevada. His percentages dipped a little bit at Texas Tech, but he's a solid three-point shooter. As you said, Kevin, one thing you always look at is his free throw shooting. He's a really good free throw shooter. So that would lead you to believe that he should be a reliable three-point shooter as well on the perimeter. So all of that, and you put it into a package, I think Williams, yes, is borderline a hand and glove fit, I think, for what KU needs at this point. You need a bona fide guy that can play the three and maybe even the four if you ask him to, right? If you wanted to go with a smaller lineup and have multiple guards out there with the combination of Council, Dawson, and Peterson or Elmarco Jackson, whatever it may be. He can do both of those things. So to me, this has the potential to be a home run hit for Kansas if they were able to eventually close the deal potentially.
Yeah, I would call it a home run hit if Kansas does get him. And the other thing, Nick, you think about when Kansas got down this year, right? When they were down by significant margins and they had to make a run. Obviously, it happened against Arkansas in the final game. It was something where the other team would kind of slow scoring, maybe even stop scoring it. In the case of Arkansas, looking like they'd never seen, a zone defense before in their lives. But the question you had, right, was wondering whether Kansas had the offensive pop to pull it off. And the same thing happened in the Missouri loss, where it was like, hey, Missouri stopped scoring for like a really long period of time. And ultimately, Kansas got that lead way down, but they didn't have something to make life easy, right? There wasn't a quote-unquote quick kill shot, in the words of Evan Mia. And so when you look at this year's team and the way it could shape up with Darian Williams there, Peterson is a streak scorer. He's somebody that does really well setting up his teammates. He's got good vision. And then, bam, he can score 8 points in 2 minutes. Like, he's that type of guy. Jaden Dawson is that type of guy where he can score really, really quickly. Council is less of a scorer, but even then, when his dauber is up, so to speak, he's a guy that can put in, a few buckets in transition really quickly. Darian Williams is a streak scorer who can put up a lot of points really quickly. And so all of a sudden, you're in a spot, Nick, where if you do happen to get into a spot where, hey, you're down 10, you're down 15, you can erase that pretty quickly because you've got multiple guys that can put together a scoring streak where it's not one guy that you're depending on. And, hey, if this guy doesn't make shots, you're in trouble. It's you have multiple guys that, depending on the night, would maybe be able to fill it up really quickly and make life easier from that standpoint. You look back at that 22 national title team, right? And the game against North Carolina. And that comeback was sparked on defense But the comeback, which happened really quickly, by the way, from 15 points down, would not have happened if Kansas wasn't scoring during that stretch. And a lot of that came in transition, but also Kansas just kind of exploded offensively while also getting those defensive stops. That's something that if you get Darian Williams, Nick, I think that this year's team would do significantly better than last year's team, than the team the year before, where I think they have a setup where they can fall down and it's not necessarily the end of the world, because they're a team that I think has the defensive potential to string together stops, but they're also a team that would have a chance to fill things up pretty quickly offensively and erase those deficits a lot more quickly than they have in the past few years.
Basically, as you can tell, Kevin and I, fans of Darian Williams and fans of the possibility of him playing in Lawrence. But there are some complicating factors, as always, with this type of stuff, with the NIL era and recruiting and so on and so forth. So kind of want to touch on some of that and maybe some things to keep in mind or keep an eye on as this sort of continues to unfold. We'll talk about that after the break. Of course, that right now gives us a chance to remind you that you should be shopping at Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com using the promo code PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order. Talked about it on a previous show. Diamond Classics have been released. You can get a Kansas pullover jersey, baseball shirt jersey. They also have a KU hat you can get as part of that as well, plus 40 plus other items, including Kansas basketball and KU football. I'm not wearing it right now, but I do have my Kansas Relay shirt on earlier in the day. Obviously, the Kansas Relays just unfolded over this past weekend, so if you were out there, you could have been showing some support for that as well with Kansas Relay shirt from homefieldapparel.com. Point being, they've got you covered on all your bases, literally and metaphorically with baseball now also as well on homefieldapparel.com. Use that promo code PAY24, 15% off your first order. That's PAY24 for 15% off your first order. More KU basketball talk is coming next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Are you ready to win some real cash during the basketball playoffs? Well, check out Pick 6 from DraftKings. When it comes to basketball payouts, DraftKings Pick 6 posterizes the competition, and yeah, that includes Prize Picks. Hit all of your picks and score higher minimum payouts on Pick 6, plus even more cash if you outscore the competition. Pick 6 is available in most states, including Missouri, California, Texas, Georgia, and more. New players get 50 in Pick 6 credits instantly on just a $5 entry. Here's what you got to do. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN for new customers to play $5. Get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offers. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Pay podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. As a reminder, if you have not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, on your wherever you get your audio, and also on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN. Subscribe over there as well. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, join the conversation. We love hearing from you guys. You can also follow us on social media at PayKCSN on Twitter, at KFlahertyKCSN. Nick Springer 29 on Twitter as well. So lots of ways to get in contact with the show. We'd love to hear from you guys. And thank you so much if you already have been commenting, and please continue to do so. As I mentioned before the break, there are some factors to keep in mind here with this particular recruitment involving KU and Darian Williams on the transfer portal. And the first is money. And that shouldn't be a surprise at this point, considering the era we live in this world of college sports with NIL. And we've talked about it before. You look at this situation for Kansas. Kansas absolutely has a significant NIL budget. There's no question about that when you look at this basketball roster. But you start to think about where it's starting to go, and you look at a guy like Darren Peterson, who is certainly taking up, you would probably think, a decent amount of money. You think about what unfolded with Flory Badunga, where he enters the transfer portal, Kansas gets him back. Part of the reason Kansas got him back, probably because they offered him a little bit more money. You start to think about the transfers Kansas has already landed. That money starts to add up. And I mentioned earlier in the show, Darian Williams is a guy that is an NBA-level player. He is somebody that anticipates potentially being in the NBA draft, and that's another factor we'll get into here in a minute. But from the money standpoint, you look at what JT Toppin allegedly got from Texas Tech, and Darian Williams, I don't think is looking for that much, but probably is looking for a decent amount. And for Kansas, the question becomes, do they have that budget to be able to for lack of a better term, afford Darian Williams to bring him in? And can the two sides agree on that financial aspect of it? So that is one thing to keep an eye on, Kevin, and sort of complicating this from, if you look, you can sort of look at it from two different perspectives. You think about it from like the athletic department as a whole, like Travis Goff. You're trying to build a multi-$100 million stadium / entertainment complex. You're obviously trying to navigate NIL with football and with basketball as well. Like there are many, many mouths to feed essentially when it comes to the money factor. And so that's one aspect of it. You think about it from the basketball specific aspect. You've already, like I said, you've already allocated a decent amount of your money, you would think, at this point. But this is also a position of significant need. And this is a position, Kevin, that I think you would agree, if you get the right guy, you could go from a top 25 team to, once again, a national title contender, which is where Kansas expects to be, obviously, with Bill Self.
Yeah, and I think that was really well put, because I think that people look at it specifically as like, well, why wouldn't you're Kansas basketball? Why wouldn't you have enough money to pay for this? But there are a lot of hands out and a lot of things that need to get paid for. And even beyond that, I see the comment, online all the time, like, hey, why don't you just hit up Booster X and like get this deal done? Like, well, okay, but like you probably also are hitting up Booster X for football stadium money. You're also hitting him up for this and that. And let's be totally clear here. All cards on the table, Nick. Kansas basketball is huge, obviously. And I'm not trying to downplay that at all. Conference realignment isn't done. And Kansas's best bet for conference realignment, to not get left holding the bag, to not get left in a really bad spot, the Big 12 implodes and KU goes the Mountain West or whatever, is to take care of the football stuff. It's to have the football program operating where it's a solid brand. It's got all the, and I'm not saying football needs to be going to the playoff every other year or whatever else, but you got to finish the stadium. You have to have the facilities stuff that we've talked about so many times. And actually, I hope at some point fairly soon, maybe we can talk a little bit more about kind of where that project is at. But football is very important right now. It really is. And it's more important right now than I think maybe people would think, because there are probably some people who are like, well, just have KU be 6-6 in football, have KU be national title good in basketball, and I'm good. I'm totally fine with that. But it's not about that. It's about putting your football in a spot where if it does come down to, hey, it's the Big Ten and the SEC, and basically we're starting college football all over type of deal, you don't want to get left out in the cold. And so it's a much bigger consideration right now with where college football is, with the way things are teetering. Nick, you're on Verbal Commitment podcast with me when we had Brandon Blaney from Central Michigan on. They're playing an entirely different sport in football than Kansas is, even. And Kansas is playing a different sport than South Carolina is. And South Carolina is probably playing a different sport than Georgia or Ohio State are. And so you're probably going to see, I would guess, some sort of consolidation, because you can't keep having Coastal Carolina over here competing in the same exact division as Ohio State or Alabama. And I think that with Kansas, it's so important to not wind up being a Big East school where you don't have the football aspect of it. And that's a really long way to say, basically be patient with the money aspect of it. It's not that anybody's sitting here saying, no, we can't do this. It's more of a, well, okay, let's make sure the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, because the last thing we need here is for us to just say, oh, just go hit up Booster X, get the money, and then we have to hit Booster X up in 2 months for something different. And so there's a planning and logistical aspect to it that maybe you wouldn't have seen if this was going on in 2015, right? Like maybe you wouldn't have seen a similar situation. But right now where Kansas is at, with the stadium being, I guess you could call it more than half done. I know you and I both play college football 25, and in college football 25, the stadium plans are enclosed on that south end. It's not as high as the rest of the stadium, but they get that directly from KU. And so whether that's a permanent plan or not, Kansas is doing the north and the west right now. The east is going to need to be taken care of. The south may need to get taken care of at some point too. And you can't have it just sit there for 10 years with the stadium having two ends done and not having the rest of it done. And so, like I said, I get that money is a concern, and it's not as simple as just go have Bob Smith write a check or, whatever, because they're also talking to those guys about things that are going to factor in on a more long-term basis than just, hey, who's going to be playing the 3 for KU this year? And again, I'm not saying that doesn't get done. I'm just saying there are more considerations at hand, and things do need to be planned out a little bit more than just saying, hey, this guy has money, let's go hit him up for money to go get this guy to play for KU this year.
There's a term you hear around this industry business when it comes to this type of conversation, donor fatigue.
Yes.
And what it basically sums up is exactly what you outlined, where sure, if you have an individual or individuals, whatever it may be, that are willing to contribute, major funding to different projects and so on and so forth, that's fantastic. Obviously, every college around the country has, individuals that are, alums or whatever it may be that are willing to contribute large funding. But basically everything you outlined, Kevin, is that it's like a well. You keep going back over and over and over again, and you can have donor fatigue. You can have that start to dry up where they can say, hey, I just gave you 5 million, 10 million, whatever it may have been last year or 6 months ago or whatever. And now you need more. Like it becomes one of those things where it's more. But from the donor perspective, that may not always be the case. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a very real thing. And it's probably the most underrated aspect of being a collegiate athletic director in the modern day is the fundraising aspect. That's probably not an aspect that nearly gets talked about enough. That is one of the more significant parts of that job, right? So, Travis Goff or any other athletic director around the country, that's part of your job. And if you ask them directly, and they were being candid, they probably said that's a large part of their job is getting on the phone or meeting with donors and explaining XYZ. This is what your money is going to be going through. This is what we'd like it, wherever you are willing to donate, whatever it may be. And it's about managing that. It's about managing all of that. And so it's very easy to say, well, if Darian Williams wants $3.2 million, just go find David Booth and have him sign a $3.2 million check. That's obviously very easy to say, but when it comes to actually that happening, it's a little bit more complex, I think, than that can make it seem, really. So that is definitely a factor to keep an eye on. And again, this is a Kansas roster that, while incomplete, certainly you look at some of the financial investment that's already been made into this roster. Obviously, that's not specifically, but again, you start to just sort of generalize the numbers, and already you've got Darren Peterson, the number one player projected in the NBA draft in 2026. That's not cheap. Floyd Badunga, you think about some of the other transfers KU was added, that money starts to add up. And so you hope it's not the deciding factor, but certainly I think it can be a factor in it. And in this specific recruitment with Darian Williams, I think it is something to monitor about, that back and forth of what Darian Williams is looking for versus maybe what KU can or is potentially willing to pay for that position. Because again, it is a premium position. It is a position that I think you and I both feel if Kansas gets the right guy, it elevates them from, again, a top 20 team or a top 25 team to a top 5 team, to a top 2 or 3 team in the country, right? If you have the right player at that position. So obviously it's very, very important. And certainly you can imagine, if you will, Bill Self lobbying for, if it's Darian Williams or if it's RJ Lewis or if it's Edric Howard or if it's Tyron Stokes, whatever it may be, certainly lobbying for making sure that it gets done. And I have no doubt in my mind that Kansas will get it done. I have no doubt in my mind that Kansas will find that player.
Yeah.
Will it be Darian Williams? Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to see. Again, we've outlined some of the other options that KU potentially could have. Obviously, Williams looks like the one that has the most traction at the moment, but it is in some ways it's almost like a merry-go-round, a spinning carousel of players and what different issues that they may have, things like that. So the other aspect, of course, for Darian Williams is the NBA. You talked about it. He's a guy that outwardly seems like he potentially wants to stay in the NBA and in the NBA draft and the NBA draft process. And again, that kind of leads back to what I mentioned earlier in the show, which is this could be recruitment that may take more time because of that aspect. Because you have until basically end of May, I think, to formally either go to the NBA draft or decide to return. So that could really stretch things out as well in this process. So that's another factor to keep in mind.
Sure. But I 100% agree with you. And I think your point on Booth too, like it's never just the $3.2 million check, right? It's never like a one-time thing. Like you're also, I mean, think about it in your personal life, right? Like your buddies are like, hey, let's go out to a really nice steak dinner on Friday. And you're like, well, I can't do it. And they're like, well, it's just $80 a person. It's like, well, okay, but I'm also paying rent. I'm also paying for my car. I'm also paying this, and this. Like I don't have, it's not just the $80 that's the problem here. And so, David Booth has a lot more money than I do. I don't step up with shock to anybody on the show, but also David Booth gets hit up for a lot of different things, whether it's, stadium stuff, whether it's different things. I think, quite frankly, that was probably part of KU's hesitation about getting the rules of basketball was, one, they weren't entirely sure, hey, is this a real thing? But I think if you poured some truth serum down guys' throats at the time, I think some of it was, well, we don't want to hit up one of our boosters, for this stuff that maybe isn't as vital to us as some of these other things. And you call for 3.2 million here, then you call them, later, you're like, well, we could really use 5 million for this. Okay, well, we're trying to start, we're trying to kickstart funding for the East Side. A big gift would really get that ball rolling. And like you said, that's where that fatigue really, really adds up. So I think, again, it's not something that people should take like Travis Goff is out here saying, no, we cannot do this. I really think that it's probably more one of those processes where it's like, we need to figure out what the plan is here so that it's not 3.2 million now and 5 million tomorrow for something else and whatever else. You have to plan these things out. And so it does take a certain level of alignment. And I'm sure Bill Self would love to have Darian Williams on the bus to Lawrence tomorrow. But at the same time, it would not surprise me at all if Kansas, one, were able to get this done, Nick, but two, whether it was just something that needed a little bit more consideration before ultimately giving the green light on something.
Let's take one more short break. We'll continue this conversation, maybe talk a little bit more generally about what else Kansas might be looking for and more. So we'll talk more Kansas basketball coming up on the other side.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
This is the Pay Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty, who will brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. If you have not already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating and review over there on Apple or Spotify. Leave us a comment on YouTube. You can also subscribe over there on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN. And I teased it earlier in the show, but on Wednesday evening, if you happen to be listening on Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday evening, Kevin is going to be live with Ryan Wallace for the Verbal Commitment Podcast on our channel on YouTube, Kansas Jocks KCSN, talking to Ian Premer, who is the number one prospect in the state of Kansas for the class of 2026. He's going to be revealing his top 5. So you'll absolutely want to tune in for that. If you're listening or watching after the fact, that's okay. You can go find it after the fact and check that out as well. So go support Kevin over there on the Verbal Commitment Podcast. Continuing this conversation, Kevin, with what KU still needs, right? I mean, we just spent a lot of the majority of the show talking about that wing position, which is the biggest need for Kansas at this point. Still not a ton of movement for KU at the backup big position, which is probably their second biggest need at the moment. There's not many players happening right now. We talked earlier about the possibility of Kansas going international for that position. We'll see how that plays out. There's even more factors involved in that going international, believe it or not, that further complicates things. So this wing spot right now, I think is as we talked about, certainly going to be the most expensive position KU still needs to fill on its roster because you're looking for more than likely a starting quality player. And B, because of that, it also becomes the position of priority. But again, some of the players that we talked about with KU being involved in, those are guys looking at the NBA, and that could potentially drag this process out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that you're probably, unless they wind up signing Darian Williams tomorrow or something, I think this is probably going to be one of those things where maybe you do fill in some of those other role spots before you kind of know who the second star on this team is. And so I think the backup big position you mentioned, you want to have a point guard, I think, that can maybe take some minutes off of Darren Peterson, either whether that's playing alongside Darren Peterson as somebody that, can just handle some ball handling burden for a little while, or whether that's somebody that, hey, I can get Darren Peterson off the court for, 5 to 7 minutes a game because this guy can run our offense. Omarco Jackson obviously ran some point as a freshman, struggled at it. I'm not saying he wouldn't be able to do that now, but I think adding another guy there would make sense. You can always have more wings, like we've talked about. And in that backup 5 spot, I think you want to have somebody that you can find there. We've talked about on previous episodes. I highly recommend checking those out. Kind of what Kansas could look for there, because, yes, there's a situation where it's a Parker Brown guy where it's like, hey, this guy's just happy to be at Kansas for the year. He's probably not going to be a game breaker, but you can sit your 5 down for a little bit. Something that I had kind of talked about was it's so tough to plan multiple years around the transfer portal. But if you could get somebody to come in basically with the thought line that, hey, if things go right for Flory this year, he's gone to the NBA draft, come in, get 15 minutes a game this year, and then next year you've got a chance to be a guy. I don't know how the money would work on that. Again, money is a consideration. It's not unlimited in these situations. And so if you're, shelling out for a really good second big man, maybe that's less you have to spend on a starting position. And so I do think that, to your point, though, that's one of the biggest needs behind sort of that 3-4, sort of secondary star player. I think that's number one. I think number 2 at this point would probably be your backup 5.
And you still have to consider with the money discussion, the possibility of revenue sharing.
Yes.
That is still looming, as sort of a dark cloud. I shouldn't say dark cloud, but a cloud in the distance. It's still looming a little bit as to how that could potentially shake up this whole conversation as it regards to NIL money and all that stuff as well. But yeah, I think you did a great job outlining it. Right, you look at the wing position we talked about for the majority of the show about that's your number one need. You look at a backup big man. Bryson Tiller is coming off of an injury. He's somebody that I think KU has high hopes for. I don't know what kind of an impact he can have this upcoming season, joining KU at semester, spending some time with the roster, but dealing with an injury. He's still working his way back from that. Obviously, Marco Jackson falls into a similar conversation with that as well, seeing that he's coming back from an injury also. So there are still some question marks, probably isn't the right term, but still some intriguing aspects of the, I guess sort of non-starting levels of the roster when you think about, Bryson Tiller and Marco Jackson as two guys really to highlight there. But yeah, this thing is coming together. Kansas, I think, is closer than they ever have been probably to securing, what this team is more than likely going to look like in 2025. You're really missing that one starting spot, probably an additional rotational backup big, and then you pretty much have your primary rotation set. And we all know that Bill Self loves to shrink his rotation as it is. So you start to think about the 7 or 8 guys that are going to get into the Bill Self circle of trust, and you roll, you go with it. You go with it. So that's kind of where things stand, I guess, for the time being. Anything else you want to add, Kevin?
Council will be in the circle of trust. I think that's, we've talked on the show about how you can feel like the starting lineup is starting to take shape, but like the 2 guys that we feel pretty good about saying, hey, these guys are starters, are Darren Peterson and Flory. I think, not without saying that he's going to be a starter, I think the other thing I would feel safe about saying is that Council will be in that Bill Self circle of trust, and that whether he's a starter, whether he's coming off the bench, I think he's going to be in that rotation and in that trust thing. But no, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I think when you're looking, if you solve that 3-4 spot, if you get the backup point guard, if you get the backup big man, I think there's still a spot left at that point. Maybe like a big shooter, and by big, I just mean like 6'4" to 6'7", a bigger wing shooter, somebody that maybe doesn't have like a full skill set, but hey, this dude can come off the bench and knock in a few. Like maybe that would be how you would fill it out. But to your point, yeah, like Bill Self, he tightens those rotations, and especially heading into March. And Self has talked about why. He said, hey, if your number 9 guy isn't as good as your top 5 guys, like, why are you clearing out time for that guy just because, right? Like, he doesn't need to be on the court in March Madness just to say, oh, we went 9 deep. Now, if he's basically a 9th starter where there's not a big drop off, that's one thing, but you don't need to play 9 guys just because. And I think the other part of it, Nick, is he's talked about, with the added, TV timeout stuff and everything in March, fatigue isn't as much of an issue once you get to the NCAA tournament. And so I think that once again, you'll have a roster probably full of 10, 11, 12 guys that feel like they probably should play. Realistically, once we get into, the dog days of March, it's probably something that's going to tighten up quite a bit, and it's not going to be easy to break through.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it with Bill Self. He has a circle of trust, and that's who he goes with. That's who he goes with. Hopefully, we are in your circle of trust in terms of trusted analysis, trusted podcasters, whatever you want to call us, trusted. I don't know, whatever. Fill in the blank. Think of a fun word, I guess, whatever it may be. But yeah, this has been a fun show. Again, Darian Williams, the name to watch at the moment. Still probably more movement to come for Kansas. But again, the roster starting to come together, and Kansas may be looking at potentially putting the last few pieces in place to build out the starting lineup and go from there. So things continue to heat up in the transfer portal. Again, the transfer portal, by the way, for basketball, it's closed. It's closed. So there will not be any new entries into the transfer portal. So whatever guys are out there are out there. Players that could be going to the NBA, players in the transfer portal. That's what it is. So The list of players starting to narrow a little bit, and I think Kansas has honed in on some guys. Obviously, Darian Williams being one of them, as we talked about on the show, as guys that could fill that last really key position for KU on this roster. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the show. Of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and our YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN, because KU, we just talked about it, they are not done on the transfer portal. There could be more major news coming up, and you'll want to stay informed, and you can do it right here with us on the Payee Podcast on KCSN. So absolutely subscribe wherever you get your audio, wherever you get your video on YouTube at Kansas Jocks KCSN. Make sure you have the notification bells on so you know when shows post, so you can stay up to date with the latest information. By the way, if you have not checked it out already, you can also check out some of our KU football spring content coverage. We're going to be continuing to put some of that out over the coming weeks as well. Our position breakdown. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, what is KU going to do at the linebacker position? We got you covered. You can go check that out. Oh my gosh, what's the offensive line going to look like? We got you covered. Go check that out. We just talked about the defensive ends earlier in the week, so you can check that show out as well. We got a couple more position groups to break down. So certainly if you're looking for, if you've got that itch, that scratch for some KU football coverage, we absolutely have you covered. You can check out those shows anytime as well. That's going to do it for this edition of the show. For Kevin Flaherty, I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.